Jeff the land shark once wielded an infinity stone. He's the weakest thing on this list. Most people think Namor is the king of Marvel's oceans. He doesn't even make the top half, because the deeper you go into Marvel's ocean, the less it belongs to heroes, kings, and civilizations, and the more it belongs to monsters, gods, and things that existed before reality itself. At first, you find mutants, then predators, then kings, then creatures that sink cities without noticing, then gods, and beneath the gods, things that make gods nervous. We're going 7 levels down, past the shoreline, past Atlantis, past the creatures that even Atlanteans fear. And by the time we reach the bottom, you'll realize something unsettling. The deepest part of Marvel's ocean isn't water, it's the unknown. The shoreline is where the ocean still touches the human world. The water is shallow. The rules still make sense, mostly because one of the weakest creatures in Marvel's ocean is Jeff the land shark, a shark so harmless looking that most people treat him like a mascot. A shark that once wielded an infinity stone. In its Jeff. Infinity Comic number 30. Jeff got his teeth on fragments of the Infinity Stones and immediately started doing things no shark should be capable of. He opened interdimensional portals, copied the abilities of heroes like Wolverine and Psylocke, and tore through an entire force of hand ninjas by himself. And somehow, he's the weakest thing on this list. That's what makes the shoreline so deceptive. It still looks safe. It still feels familiar, but the ocean is already starting to bend the rules. Namorita proves that. She's a clone of Namor, engineered from Atlantean genetics and born between 2 worlds. Strong enough to hold up collapsing structures and tear through armored machinery with her bare hands, she represents something the surface world rarely understands about Marvel's oceans. The water doesn't just produce life, it changes it. Triton is another example. As a member of the inhuman royal family, he was designed for depths most humans would never survive. He can endure crushing underwater pressure, move through the ocean at incredible speeds, and operate in environments that would kill ordinary people within minutes. But even Triton carries a reminder of the boundary between land and sea. Stay out of the water too long, and his body begins to fail. Because at this level, the ocean hasn't fully claimed its inhabitants yet. They're still connected to the surface, still recognizable, still human. But that won't last. The deeper you go, the less the ocean adapts to you, and the more you adapt to it. The shoreline is still human. The currents aren't. The shoreline is where the ocean touches humanity. The currents are where it starts rewriting it. At this depth, nobody stays the same. The ocean changes whatever enters it, sometimes through mutation, sometimes through technology, sometimes through accidents that should have killed them. But the result is always the same. The person who enters the water isn't the one who comes back out. Take quicksand. She began as a scientist. Then a nuclear accident transformed her into something that barely qualifies as human anymore. A living storm of radioactive sand. A body that can disperse, reform, and survive destruction that would kill almost anyone else. At one point, she trapped Thor himself and fought the god of thunder to a standstill, not because she was stronger, because the rules that applied to ordinary people no longer applied to her. The ocean had already started rewriting them, and quicksand wasn't the only one. Tiger shark is what happens when someone embraces the transformation. Todd Arliss was once an Olympic swimmer. Then his DNA was fused with both Namor and a tiger shark. The ocean didn't make him stronger. It made him hungry, stronger than most Atlanteans, faster than many of the heroes who hunt him, and violent enough to repeatedly challenge Atlantis itself. He's not a king. He's what happens when survival turns into predation. But not every transformation comes from biology. Some people force their way into the depths. Stingray built his own path. Instead of mutating himself, Walter Newell engineered a suit capable of surviving environments that would crush ordinary humans instantly. His armor allowed him to stand alongside superhumans and endure attacks from opponents far beyond human limits. Where Tiger Shark adapted to the ocean, Stingray adapted humanity to it. And that's what makes this level different from the shoreline. The people here weren't born for the deep. They became something else because of it. The ocean changed them. The next level was born there. The ocean changed the beings in the last level. The creatures down here were born for it. At this depth, survival isn't enough. The ocean doesn't reward survival. It rewards dominance. These aren't explorers. They aren't mutants trying to adapt. They're predators. And in Marvel's oceans, predators don't just hunt, they conquer. Attuma understands that better than anyone. Long before he became one of Atlantis' greatest enemies, Attuma learned a simple truth about the deep. Power belongs to whoever can take it. Again and again, he has launched invasions against Atlantis itself, challenging kings, armies, and entire civilizations through sheer force. At one point, he caught a massive warship thrown at him by Namor and hurled it back, not because he ruled the ocean, because he believed the ocean belonged to the strong. And Attuma was rarely the strongest thing in the room by accident. But the deep creates more than warriors. It creates monsters disguised as soldiers. Orca is proof of that. Genetically altered with killer whale DNA, Orca became a living siege weapon, a creature so physically overwhelming that he once pinned Namor to the ocean floor and battered the seabed itself apart. He's the kind of threat that makes strategy feel irrelevant, the kind that turns every fight into a test of survival. But brute force isn't the only path to power in the deep. Sometimes, the most dangerous predator is the one that lets others do the killing. That's where Krang comes in. Unlike Attuma or Orca, Krang didn't rely on overwhelming strength. He relied on ambition, manipulation, control. As a military commander, he spent years plotting against Atlantis from within, using deception and forbidden power to challenge Namor's rule. At one point, the Serpent Crown allowed him to bend entire populations to his will, because predators don't always hunt with teeth. Sometimes they hunt with influence, and that's what separates this level from everything above it. The shoreline still belonged to people. The currents still carried traces of humanity. Down here, those traces are fading. The ocean isn't creating survivors anymore. It's creating conquerors. But even conquerors need something to rule. Predators still need prey. Kings need kingdoms. For 3 levels, we've been moving deeper into Marvel's ocean, through mutations, through predators, through conquerors. And if you've been waiting for Namor, here he is, halfway down the list, not at the bottom, not even close. That's the first thing most people get wrong about Marvel's oceans. They assume Atlantis sits at the center of everything. It doesn't. Atlantis is simply the deepest civilization. And civilization is no longer the highest form of power. Still, if you're looking for a king, there is no greater king than Namor. For centuries, he has ruled Atlantis while balancing 2 worlds that were never meant to coexist: the surface and the deep. His strength is legendary. He survived nuclear explosions, flooded entire nations, and once lifted a massive research island from the ocean itself and carried it into the sky. But raw power isn't what makes Namor dangerous. It's authority. Unlike the predators above him, Namor doesn't fight alone. He commands armies, ancient technology, mystical artifacts, entire ecosystems. When Namor moves, Atlantis moves with him, and that's what elevates him beyond the conquerors above. A predator can win a battle. A king can reshape history. But Namor isn't the only ruler lurking in these waters, because kingdoms attract rivals. And few rivals embody that truth better than Lyra. Lyra wasn't born into power. She wanted it. A hybrid of Atlantean and Lemurian blood, she spent years manipulating wars, betrayals, and political chaos in pursuit of a throne she believed should belong to her. Again and again, she challenged Atlantis from within and without, not through brute force, through ambition. Because kingdoms aren't threatened by monsters. They're threatened by people willing to become monsters to rule them. And then there's Venus, a being whose existence reminds us that even Atlantis isn't the oldest thing living beneath the waves. Created by powers older than most civilizations, Venus wielded a voice capable of calming minds, bending emotions, and influencing beings far beyond human understanding. At one point, she soothed the Sentry himself, a man whose power terrified heroes, villains, and entire governments. Not with strength, with influence. Because power in a kingdom isn't always measured by what you can destroy. Sometimes it's measured by what you can control. And that's the lesson of this level. The predators below Atlantis may be stronger than most rulers, but strength alone doesn't build civilizations. Kings command nations. Queens shape history. Empires outlive warriors. For a while, because the deeper you go, the less the ocean cares about kingdoms. The less it cares about borders, the less it cares about civilization itself. Kings rule oceans. The next level ignores them. Kings rule kingdoms, but kingdoms only matter if the world around them is stable. At this depth, it isn't. The deeper you go into Marvel's ocean, the less you encounter rulers, and the more you encounter disasters. Not villains, not conquerors, not even civilizations. Disasters. The kind of things that can erase cities simply by existing. Take Monstro. When Monstro rises from the depths, nobody asks what it wants. They ask how much damage it's about to cause. This colossal octopus has torn apart military ports, shrugged off torpedoes, and dragged warships beneath the waves as if they weighed nothing at all. Entire naval forces become irrelevant in its presence. Not because Monstro is evil, because a hurricane isn't evil. An earthquake isn't evil, and neither is a creature too large to notice the destruction it leaves behind. But even Monstro isn't the biggest thing lurking below Atlantis. Giganto is worse, much worse. The name refers to an ancient species of deviant mutates that have survived since forgotten ages of Earth's history. One of them swallowed a nuclear bomb, then survived the explosion. Not weakened, not crippled, survived. Imagine being so physically overwhelming that a nuclear weapon becomes an inconvenience. That's the scale we're dealing with now. These creatures don't dominate kingdoms. They make kingdoms irrelevant. And then there's Fang Foom, a being so ancient that calling him a monster almost feels inaccurate. He's a conqueror, a dragon, an alien intelligence that spent centuries hidden within the deepest places of the world before awakening to devastate armies, shatter mountains, and bend entire populations to his will. Unlike Monstro or Giganto, Fang Foom understands exactly how terrifying he is. And that's what makes him different. The others are natural disasters. Fang Foom is a natural disaster with intent, a force of destruction that chooses where to strike, which makes him even more dangerous. And that's the lesson of this level. Kings build civilizations. Predators hunt within them. But none of that matters when something large enough to swallow the battlefield arrives. At this depth, power stops being political. It becomes geological. Continents, trenches, mountain ranges. The ocean itself begins to feel alive. But for all their size, for all their destruction, these creatures still obey the rules of reality. They still live inside the universe. The next level doesn't. Monsters still obey physics. The next level doesn't. Monsters can destroy kingdoms. They can sink fleets. They can erase entire coastlines. But no matter how powerful they become, they're still part of the natural world. They still live inside reality. The next level doesn't. Because the deeper you go into Marvel's ocean, the older things become. Older than Atlantis. Older than humanity. Older than history itself. At this depth, the ocean stops feeling like a place. It starts feeling like a memory of powers that existed long before anyone gave them names. Neptune is one of those powers. To the people of Atlantis, he's more than a god. He's a constant, a presence that has watched over the ocean since civilizations first emerged from the shore. When gods wage war, Neptune stands among them. His authority extends across the seas themselves, allowing him to command forces that make even the greatest leviathans seem insignificant. A creature like Giganto can destroy a city. Neptune can command the ocean surrounding it. That's the difference. One is powerful. The other defines the environment where power exists. But even Neptune feels familiar. He has a name, a face, a mythology. The ocean remembers something older, something stranger, something far more unsettling. Mother Shark. She isn't a queen. She isn't even really a goddess. She's an ecosystem, a living embodiment of the ocean's oldest instinct, survival through consumption. Long before kingdoms rose from the waves, life was already hunting life beneath the surface, and Mother Shark became the spiritual expression of that cycle. She doesn't rule marine predators. She is the reason they exist. She guides the souls of sea creatures, shapes entire evolutionary paths, and decides which species continue into the future and which vanish forever. When demonic forces invaded the depths, Mother Shark devoured them. Not as a warrior defending her territory, as an immune system removing an infection. That's what makes her so terrifying. She doesn't think like a ruler, or a hero, or even a god. She thinks like the ocean itself. And if Mother Shark represents the ocean's oldest instincts, Set represents its oldest nightmares. Long before Atlantis, long before Neptune, Set was already poisoning civilizations from the shadows, an elder god of chaos whose influence spread through the infamous Serpent Crown, corrupting kings, kingdoms, and entire bloodlines. Again and again, rulers believed they could control its power. Again and again, they learned the same lesson. The deeper powers of the ocean don't serve humanity. Humanity serves them. That's why this level feels different. The monsters above were terrifying because of what they could destroy. The beings here are terrifying because of what they represent. Authority, evolution, chaos. For the first time in the descent, we're no longer dealing with physical threats. We're dealing with ideas, concepts, forces woven into reality itself. And yet, even gods have limits. They still exist inside the universe. They still obey the boundaries of creation. The next level waits outside those boundaries. Even gods live inside reality. The next level waits outside it. This is the point where Marvel's ocean stops feeling like an ocean at all. The water is still there. The trenches are still there. But they're no longer the important part, because at the deepest level, the ocean becomes a doorway. A boundary between reality and something older. Something waiting on the other side. The deeper you go, the less you find creatures adapted to the ocean. The less you find rulers. The less you find gods. And the more you find things that were never meant to exist inside the universe in the first place. The many-angled ones are among the oldest examples. Ancient entities that exist beyond conventional dimensions, beyond physical laws, beyond the geometry that holds reality together. They don't swim through the ocean. They bleed into it, from places where distance, time, and matter no longer behave the way they're supposed to. To beings like this, the deepest trenches on Earth aren't homes. They're cracks. Weak points, places where reality becomes thin. And if the many-angled ones are what waits beyond the door, Shuma-Gorath is what happens when something comes through it. Long before humanity existed, long before Atlantis rose from the sea, Shuma-Gorath ruled worlds, entire dimensions, entire realities. His influence stretches across hundreds of universes, corrupting everything it touches. When his presence reached Earth, it was so overwhelming that Doctor Strange was forced into an unthinkable choice. To stop Shuma-Gorath from consuming his master's mind, he had to kill the Ancient One himself, not defeat Shuma-Gorath. Delay him, because that's the terrifying thing about beings like this. They don't conquer worlds. They consume them, not just their civilizations. Their reality, space, time, matter, meaning. To Shuma-Gorath, an ocean isn't a kingdom. It isn't an ecosystem. It isn't even water. It's a concept, and concepts can be devoured. But even Shuma-Gorath isn't alone in the abyss. The dweller in darkness comes from somewhere even stranger, a being so ancient that it survived the death of a previous universe, a predator that feeds on fear itself. Not fear as an emotion, fear as a resource. As civilizations collapse, as worlds lose hope, as entire populations descend into panic, the dweller grows stronger. It doesn't need armies. It doesn't need followers. It doesn't need worship. It only needs terror. And eventually, every civilization creates plenty of that. That's what makes this final level different from everything above it. The kings ruled oceans. The monsters ruled ecosystems. The gods ruled concepts. These things don't rule anything. They exist beyond the idea of rule, beyond kingdoms, beyond evolution, beyond reality itself. And that's where the descent ends. Not at the bottom of the ocean, but beyond it, because the deepest part of Marvel's ocean was never water. It was the unknown. Most people think Marvel's oceans are about Atlantis. They're not. Atlantis is only level 4. Halfway down, that's what makes Marvel's ocean so different from its surface world. The deeper we went, the less humanity mattered. The shorelines still belonged to people. The currents changed them. The deep created predators. The predators built kingdoms. The kingdoms were overshadowed by monsters. The monsters gave way to gods. And beneath the gods, we found things that don't even belong to reality. By the end of this descent, Atlantis stopped feeling like the center of Marvel's ocean. It started feeling like a survivor inside it. A single kingdom trying to exist in a place that was ancient long before Atlantis ever rose from the seafloor. That's why Namor stays in his lane. Not because he's weak, not because he lacks power, but because even the king of Atlantis understands something terrifying. The ocean was never his. It was here before his kingdom, before his bloodline, before humanity. And long after every throne has crumbled and every crown has rusted away, it will still belong to whatever waits in the dark below. If you thought Marvel's ocean was terrifying, wait until you see what's hiding in its cosmos.